4 burning questions for the Browns after the first week of free agency. This from Sports Illustrated. Number 1, will Andrew Berry restructure any more contracts in the offseason? Number 2, after the first week of free agency, what positions will the Browns prioritize in the draft? 3, should the Browns consider trading Greg Newsome? And 4, why didn't the Browns try to acquire Justin Fields if the price was only a 6th-round pick? So Fields was traded to the Steelers for a 6th-round pick, can become a 4th-round pick if he plays 51% or more of the snaps. All right, let's tackle the Justin Fields one. It doesn't make a lot of sense because you're going to end up, you would assume they'll exercise the 5th-year option on that, and that's $20-some million.
Yeah, I mean, if they would have made a trade for Fields, then the Browns probably don't pick up that 5th-year option, right? I mean, if they do, then it's Watson's gone, right? Like, you can't be paying a quarterback 46 and a quarterback 25 or whatever that number is, right? So if they would have made that deal, it would have been a 1-year deal. Now, that's what they have Jameis Winston for. So I'm all for that argument if you want to make it that Fields is better than Winston. I think he is. I really like Fields. I know the numbers aren't great, but when I watch him, I think there's a ton of potential that he's starting to realize. I think he's in a terrible situation in Chicago. But I think the Browns don't make that trade because then it opens up a bunch of questions, right? Like, nobody's going to say, hey, should Winston be playing ahead of Watson? And we can argue whether or not this is the right philosophy to have. But I think if you bring in Fields, that just creates a bunch of questions that the Browns don't want to have, right? They don't want to have the Flacco questions. I don't think they want the Fields questions. Now, you can say, hey, bring in your best quarterbacks, and then it should have been Fields, and I'll listen to that argument. But to me, that's why they didn't do that.
Yeah, and I'm sure I would expect Andrew Berry to restructure some more contracts. We'll see how that goes. What do you think the positions they prioritize in the draft?
Yeah, I think they can go anywhere. I think the roster is solid enough that, the whole best player available, I think they can do that, and they probably will do that. But if all things are equal, I feel like there might be a half a defensive tackle short. I know they signed Quentin Jefferson, and we talked about the guys they re-signed. They bring back Tomlinson, they bring back Ika. So they definitely have enough there. Right now is Ika the starter, the second starter is Jefferson, is Harris. I kind of like that Christian Wilkins. I understand why they didn't go get him. He's too much money. But, if Mason Smith's there at 54, I think that's attractive. I think you could take a shot there with the young D tackle. You can never take receiver off the board. Hugely important position. The top 3 guys are all entering the last year of their contracts, so I could see receiver. And just through the rest of the draft, number 2 tight end, I think they're still short there. Maybe another running back. And get younger on the interior of that offensive line.
And relative to Greg Newsome trading him, what do you think?
Yeah, I could see why the Browns would be open to that, right? Because they like Denzel Ward, they're paying him. They like Martin Emerson Jr., they're going to pay him. And they like Cam Mitchell, who was the slot guy behind Newsome, and they might think there's not a huge drop-off there. Having said that, and plus it's a corner, so you might be able to get something back for him. And you're going to have to pay him eventually, right? He's coming into that. They have to decide about the 5th-year option in May. So I understand why it would set up for that. I just don't think you can trade a guy who's a legitimate starter in this league at a crazily important position. You better get a lot back. And if it's just, a 3rd-round draft pick, to me that's not enough. So I don't think it'll happen because I don't think the Browns will get what they would need to get for Newsome. But if they got a great offer, then yeah, I think they would move on just because at some point they're going to have to pay the number 2 corner, and it'll probably be Emerson rather than Newsome.
Yeah, and it's like 13-point-something million. Yeah, 13 points, something like that for his 5th-year option. And I would expect they'll pick that up and figure out what to do with him because he is a starting caliber corner.
Yeah, you have to pick that up because whether you can trade him and somebody else will pay him that, that's a great value for a starting corner, right? So it makes no sense not to do that. And I think it allows the flexibility to trade at some point down the line. But yeah, paying that for Greg Newsome in 2025, that's a good deal.